General Nahom, thank you. If you'd open up a bit, and then we'll go to General Liquori for opening remarks.
Yeah, well thank you, Orville. Thank you to the whole team for AFA for hosting this. And I do apologize for racing in late. The flexibility in this building, sometimes the clocks don't matter depending on the meeting. And the first thing I'm going to budget for is a high-speed rail between here and some of the senior offices down the hallway, and then I can make it on time for these meetings. No, it's great to be here. I'll tell you, as we look at the 22 appropriation coming out and then the 23 president's budget submission that's going across the river right now, it's an interesting time we're in. We're all watching the news and watching what's going on in Ukraine and the conflict over there. And I think the first thing you got to say that your heart goes out with the human tragedy that we're watching unfold, and certainly about my prayers with the Ukrainian people. But the other part I'll say is that as a military person, there is a bit of a fascination with watching how the military operations unfolding and what it means for us as a United States Air Force and a Department of Defense, and as the planner and programmer for the Air Force. Are there adjustments that need to be made in how we invest and how we move forward? So it's been very interesting to watch that as we go forward. We have spent the last 20 plus years, and we've been saying this for 2 or 3 cycles. We've spent the last 20 plus years really concentrated on the coin fight, the counterinsurgency fight. Whereas in Air Force, we were obviously in response to what was going on the ground in terms of the counterinsurgency, but also how we conducted air operations was in relatively permissive environments. Not wholly. There's certainly examples out there that we saw some less than permissive environments, but for the most part, we were able to operate as we needed to operate to get the fight done. And that certainly changes as you look at peer competition. You look at what a peer state actor can bring against the United States Air Force and the joint force that we're a part of in any contingency. And then specifically, as you look at where we're going as an Air Force, you have to look at some of the differences in a fight that would be in a Pacific theater versus a European or a Middle East theater. And I think the number one thing that comes to everyone's mind is just the distances. And you look at some of our platforms, and specifically, I'll narrow in. I can say this about most of them, but you narrow in on our fighters, which we all heard Commander General Kelly talk about his remarks at AFA about we've been designing fighters for years with European theater ranges in mind, from World War II right up to and including the F-35. And as we look at the future investment, we've got to account for going greater distances and potentially loitering longer with greater weapons loads. And certainly we're making adjustments to that. Obviously, there's an all-domain perspective on this one, not just within the air and space forces working together, but certainly across our other joint partners, and how we share information and how we share data. And certainly that's a big part of when you talk about joint all-domain command and control, the ability to share data amongst Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine, and Space Force platforms to get to targeting solutions at the speed of relevance in a high-end fight. We're going to be contested, and I'll let obviously Bill talk about the space area, but I, as he and I work together, I'm fascinated by where the Space Force is going as you look at contested environments, because it's such a key to how we as an Air Force and a joint force are going to do business. But to say that we're going to need to learn to operate out of a contested, potentially denied area is something we have to work toward. And it's not just operating in these contested areas as we look at agile combat deployment and operating differently away from potentially main operating bases in smaller areas, but also how do we work logistics? And you'll hear the term logistics under attack, but how do you work logistics in a contested, non-permissive environment is something we absolutely look towards the future. As well as you have to mention cyber, because anything we do, we have to determine not only our how we operate in these cyber how we operate in cyber regime, but also the cyber vulnerabilities in our platforms. Not only the legacy platforms we're modernizing for pure fights, but certainly the ones we're purchasing. The U.S. Air Force is committed. I'll simplify it in my terms that, there's three things I think that the United States Air Force brings that I think that the nation expects the United States Air Force to bring, and we're the only ones that are going to bring them. And the first one is air superiority. I think the nation expects us to provide air superiority, freedom of movement for an engagement, a joint engagement in any location anywhere in the world. And we certainly can do that now, and we're certainly tooling ourselves to make sure we can do that in the future. The second thing is global strike. We have to have the ability to strike anywhere on the planet in a matter, and do this in terms of hours and days, not weeks and months. And that's certainly where the Air Force lives. And you look at our investments, not only in our fighter platforms, but certainly our bomber platforms as we modernize the B-2 for the future. And we continue great progress on our B-21 platform. And the last one is the rapid global mobility. And I tell you, we got the greatest example because the unbelievable work our airmen and those supporting our airmen did over the summer in the withdrawal out of Afghanistan. Just incredible to watch our C-17s and other mobility platforms and how they performed to do something that no other organization on earth could have done. And that the U.S. Air Force has to do that now, and we have to be able to do that in the future. Obviously, all those three things I mentioned are closely supported by the intel, surveillance, reconnaissance networks, the ISR networks, and certainly the command and control that we as an Air Force bring in any engagement. As we accelerate modernization, I'll just mention a couple quick areas, and I'm going to turn it over to Bill. And I know you'd probably rather get the questions anyway. First and foremost, I'll mention, and I'm going to talk as your A8 here, who looks, really through the investment lens. The nuclear recapitalization is an enormous undertaking. And if you look at where we're invested across the FIDA as our numbers become visible, you'll see that what we call for years a nuclear bow wave is not just RDT&E, research and development. Now it's actually procurement of some of these nuclear articles, and it gets very expensive. And so obviously that does put a lot of pressure on the remainder of the budget. I talked about air superiority. We're obviously not only continuing our operations with our F-22 and modernizing our F-22s to continue that air superiority platform in the near future, but we're heavily invested in our next generation air dominance family of systems to assure that we can maintain air superiority. And I think that ties in with some of the command and control platforms, certainly, as you'll see in our budget as we look to recapitalize our E3 AWACS fleet going forward. I talked a little bit about JADC2, but certainly the Air Force's contribution that the Advanced Battle Management System, and I think you'll see not only a big discussion with our operational imperatives that our Secretary talked about during AFA, but also you'll see that in our investment. We talked over the last couple of years about a fourth fighter fleet with the next generation air dominance, the F-35, the F-15 platform, and certainly the F-16, which we'll have around for 7 years. Those multi-role platforms take some modernization to make sure they stay relevant. I think you'll see that not only in our F-16 fleet, but certainly the F-15s that we're keeping around on the E model, as well as the F-15EX investment. Our readiness, we did get our, I would say in the near term, in the budget year, we did some pretty good work with our friends down at OSD, getting our weapon system sustainment to a level that we're comfortable with. Could it be more? Absolutely. But we do have some work to do in the years that follow, so we'll continue to pound the drum on weapon system sustainment, as well as other readiness items, certainly our flying hour program and other items. We are doing a lot of ISR modernization. Can't get into a lot of the details in unclassed form. What I will say is, as you look at our platforms that contribute to the data flow of the Advanced Battle Management System, any platform that's going to be out there to sense is going to have to be able to be connected into the Advanced Battle Management System. It's going to have to be able to persist, and it's going to have to be able to survive. And what you'll see is many of our existing platforms don't meet that criteria. So you'll see us recapitalizing our ISR fleets. Many of the specifics of it, though, for a time period will be classified. I talked a little bit about E3, but I'll tell you, as we look at the AMTI, or the Airborne Moving Target Indicator, the ability to see things moving through the air. Our AWACS fleet is challenged both with maintainability as well as capability. And as you'll see in our budget, we're looking to recapitalize that fleet so we can continue to provide that, not only that surveillance picture, but that airborne command and control mode. Air refueling and airlift. I say first of all, airlift. Our C-17 fleet will continue to modernize our C-17 fleet moving forward with just the backbone of our airlift fleet. We'll continue to work on our C-5 fleet as well as our C-130s. We're bringing on some more C-130Js in the FY22, and we'll continue to modernize some of our C-130Hs so we have a good tactical airlift fleet going forward. We did spend a lot of money on the air refueling fleet, making sure we keep the ongoing recapitalization of our refueling fleet active with our KC-46. We're very excited about that platform. We continue to work with the manufacturer to make it better, and I think soon all we'll see that when we get that platform where we know it can be, it'll be the best refueling, and we'll start getting that in numbers. Not too much change in our budget. You'll see in special ops, but we do have some investment in key programs, as well as on the airman side. There's some airman programs that obviously pay raise and other things that we're invested in, and there's some other smaller programs that making sure that we continue to take care of our airmen throughout this budget cycle. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Bill Liquori to talk about the spaceport side.
Thanks, Abu. Thanks, Orville and AFA and all the sponsors for hosting us. It's a great opportunity for us. I guess as we talk about delivering one budget year, but I think for Abu and I, we work in 3 different budget years on any given day. But focused on 23, it's a great opportunity to be able to talk to the members and others that are dialed in today about this. So on the Space Force side, much like the Air Force side, our budget is informed by the emerging national defense strategy, combatant command integrated priority lists, as well as the growing threat in our domain, much like Abu talked about some of the threats in their domain. Our budget is based on data-driven analysis that comes from, as part of the stand-up of the Space Force, we created an organization called the Space Warfighting Analysis Center. They do the bulk of the analytic work for us that inform the POM inputs, inform the POM prioritization. And so this budget is heavily flavored based on that analysis. Much like the Air Force has 3 areas they seek to accomplish, we have 3 cornerstone responsibilities. This budget is designed to be able to get after those to enable joint lethality and effectiveness, because the reality of why we went to space as a nation was to enable what it is that we do from a national security perspective. The second is to preserve freedom of action in the domain. And then the third is to provide independent options for national leadership. We've got to be nested in, as I said, with the National Defense Strategy as it comes out. The Department of Defense is seeking to advance our goals in the National Defense Strategy through 3 methods: integrated deterrence, campaigning, and building an enduring advantage. And so the budget inputs that we have go directly to those 3 ways of delivering on the National Defense Strategy. And at the end of the day, it's our capabilities that we provide that underpin what it is the Joint Force does each day. Our entire Joint Force as a nation is planned and postured with the assumption that space will be there and enable them to be more lethal and effective. Given the growing threats in our domain, that is something that we have to work towards to be able to make sure we maintain that. It's not something that we can take for granted anymore. And so much like all the other services, we've got to modernize our capabilities to be ready for this warfighting domain. This particular budget primarily makes a bold shift to more resilient architectures, heavily focused this year on missile warning and missile tracking, and a new approach that we're taking to be responsive to not only the changing threat from a missile perspective, i.e. the emerging threats that are hypersonic and maneuverable, and the changing threats in our own domain, which force us to make sure that we have a more resilient architecture that will be able to do the detection and tracking of those emerging missile threats. So that is the centerpiece of this POM, is to begin to shift to a hybrid architecture, combination of low Earth orbit and medium Earth orbit, to be not only able to detect and track emerging threats, but to be resilient in the face of threats in our own domain. The reality is this is our second budget that we're delivering as an independent service, obviously a key task for an independent service. And so the team that I have here in my S8 side of the house has been working this on behalf of the entire service. But at the end of the day, it's a team sport. None of this happens without the analytics that come from our Space Warfighting Analysis Center, who, in addition to doing their analytics, also seeks to unify the various national security space players when it comes to building out force design. So in the case of missile warning, missile tracking, we're very tightly coupled with Derek Tournier and the Space Development Agency, as well as the Missile Defense Agency for that particular force design work. We also get a bunch of good inputs from our field commands as we build this, our headquarters directorates, acquisition program offices, and then really none of this works without the teamwork that we have with Abu and his team, as well as Steve Herrera and the FM team, who kind of carry these things across the goal line for us. And so we're, the end result was certainly an increased top line, which we are very appreciative of. And look forward to engaging with you and those on the net to talk more about that today. And we look forward to engaging with Congress as they go through markups and conferences as this budget continues to evolve. I'll stop there and we'll take questions.
Well, thanks very much. Great opening remarks. And obviously, we're going to be in this together. Certainly, your Air Force Association support in the coming months as we look to closing out a budget at the end of the year. And again, support for dominant air and space forces are all our airmen and guardians in a tough fight as we look at facing threats. General Nahom, you covered this somewhat already, but to reiterate the requirements for a mix of combat air forces, including the F-35, a purchase now double of F-15EXs, and obviously B-21 into that mix. Some people look at these combat capabilities, combat air forces capabilities singularly, and obviously you don't. You've got tremendous experience in how those forces are integrated. So while you'll get lots of questions on the decrease in the buy of F-35s, could you talk a bit about the real requirement for F-35 specific to SEAD? We've talked about that capability at some length, suppression of enemy air defenses and the requirement there. And just beyond the cut itself, what appears to be a cut in F-35s with commitment to the overall buy of F-35s, why do you potentially need the F-35 or more F-35s than you were able to budget for in the context of facing threat scenarios, certainly China and a China fight?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Laura. I think certainly there's a balance with it. There's always limits to the resources we have. Like Bill said, we're very thankful for the resources that the Air Force was given, and we do have to make some decisions on it. Now, the F-35, this program has certainly evolved since it started. I mean, you're talking 20 plus years from when this program started, and when it did start, there was a different threat. And so as we look at the F-35, we have to evolve this airplane with the evolving threat. And we do spend resources on modernizing. We can talk about, without getting into the details, the Tech Refresh 3, the Block 4 capabilities, and getting the F-35 we need. We're also investing in some advanced propulsion. And there's also some infrastructure pieces in the F-35 program that we're invested in to make sure that we have the right F-35 program going forward. Would we like to have more new fighters right now? Absolutely. The chief has been on record for the last couple cycles saying that we as an Air Force would like to get to 70 plus fighters a year so we can continue to refresh our squadrons and get some of these older platforms out of service that are not only expending a lot of resource in terms of manpower and money, but also many of them don't meet the performance which needed for a pure fight. And so, right now we are prioritizing on the F-35 program to make sure we're getting the F-35 we need with all the investments to get to that capability. And we certainly, on the capacity side, we continue to buy as many as we can inside of given resources. You mentioned the F-15EX. The F-15EX really came about going back a few cycles is to initially recapitalize the F-15C as that platform was rapidly deteriorating in its maintainability. As well as you can say, the F-15C came about as an air superiority platform. Certainly, the threat has evolved beyond its capabilities in many respects. Excuse me. So the idea right there in the EX is to recapitalize several of the F-15C squadrons as quickly as possible, so we can get that aging platform into retirement and stop expending resources on it. So we're excited about getting the F-15EX into our force. It offers us some opportunities to carry outsized weapons, things you don't necessarily are going to put internal into a stealth platform. It also is it's got a really a good sensor package, carries a lot of gas, carries a lot of ordnance. There's a lot of things we can do with an F-15EX, and certainly in permissive environments. It also offers us the opportunity to recapitalize the squadrons quickly because it's going to be replacing it on existing F-15 infrastructure, and it allows a quicker and cheaper, frankly, recapitalization of many of the squadrons that we're going to put into. So we think we struck a pretty good balance on this budget, but as you brought up, there's limits to the resources, and certainly we'd like to recapitalize our fighter fleet quicker if we could, but we have to also make sure we have to meet the balance and get after the capability that's needed for a pure fighter. Or if I think you're on mute.
How do you read now?
I got you now.
Okay, good. Bill, you talked about resiliency. It's a great word, but how would you further describe resiliency in the context of maintaining the Space Force capabilities you need to hold targets at risk? When you look at any one of a number of scenarios, certainly in an Indo-PACOM fight and a Yukon fight, and beyond precision navigation and timing, I know you're working on GMTI and AMTI capabilities that are absolutely essential in the employment of the forces that Abu just talked about. So could you talk about sort of match up resiliency and requirements for your Space Force capabilities and targeting AMTI and GMTI?
Sure. So great question. Thanks, Orville. So to start with, resiliency is far more than something that the Space Force needs to do. Clearly, it is one of Secretary Kendall's operational imperatives. Matter of fact, the first one is to develop a resilient space order of battle. He recognized right from the beginning when he got here what it is that the Joint Force, the value that the Joint Force gains from our space order of battle that's on orbit. And so it's one of our imperatives as a Department of the Air Force, but it's also a national imperative. If you look at the criticality of space, not only to our American way of war, but our American way of life, it is a national imperative that we've got resilient architectures. For those that follow closely, the National Space Council met several months ago, published a United States Space Priorities Framework, and resilience is a key piece of that as it rolled out as well. And so in this budget specifically, we're accelerating our efforts to get to more resilient and defendable space posture. As I mentioned, specifically in this case for missile warning, missile tracking, that was the first force design that our Space Warfighting Analysis Center went to tackle. And we get after that through a hybrid approach of a proliferated low Earth orbit constellation, as well as some medium Earth orbit satellites to be able to, it's that combination that allows us to not only detect and track those maneuvering or hypersonic threats, but also to be resilient by design. And so how did we get to that? So this Space Warfighting Analysis Center team is, I would call them in the small but mighty category, right? They've got a group of experts, PhDs, and things of that nature that take a look at a given mission area. They build highly realistic blue models in the digital space in a model-based system engineering environment. They do the same thing for red threats, and then they fly those off against each other. In the case of missile warning, missile tracking, they took a look at hundreds of different architectural combinations. And for each one of those combinations, they ran thousands of runs on their computer systems to be able to see which ones perform the best in the face of not only the threats to our space capability, but in the face of the emerging missile threats. that's where we ended up centering on this. And so it's kind of interesting. Secretary Kendall, if I remember it right, Abu, he got here the day before our budgets were due to the Department of Defense. And so we had an opportunity. He jumped right in and wanted to be able to influence the budgets. And so spent the day with both of us as we walked through things. The data-driven aspects of what it is that the Space Warfighting Analysis Center provided us from an analytic perspective to inform this POM resonated with him immediately. Anyone that has worked with Secretary Kendall knows that he likes data to be able to drive decisions and to allow us to make smart decisions. And so that resonated with him. And so that's the path that we took in this budget. I would describe it as the centerpiece of the POM that we delivered. And that Warfighting Analysis Center team will be doing the same thing for successive mission areas. The next two that they're in the process of working, you mentioned the ground moving target indicator, Orville. The other one they're working on right now is space data transport. So space-to-space communications as a part of the larger communications architecture. Both of those will also inform Secretary Kendall's operational imperatives, one of those being moving target indicator, and the other being an ABMS JADC2 focused imperative. And some of the results that come from that space data transport force design work will heavily inform the ABMS JADC2 imperative, ultimately informing, in those cases, the 24 budget. And we plan to continue to do this on an annual basis, and that's how we will build our POM going forward, kind of prioritizing mission areas based on what's required from the strategic context and the threat. And then we'll go back and update them. And ideally, we then take that set of work and then we finalize requirements, if you will, and then pass those on to our acquisition community, who then divides up the various parts of the architecture through the Space Acquisition Council to say, this acquisition organization will take the low Earth portion, in this case, for Missile Warning, Missile Tracking, that'll be Space Development Agency, and then our Space Systems Command will work the medium Earth orbit. And we'll do the same thing every year to make sure that our budgets are informed by model-based system engineering and data-driven analysis, so that whatever we propose in the budget closes when it comes to physics.
Thanks. It's enthralling. I would note for all of us that you're already working on the 24 budget. So, work never stops in our Pentagon. General Nahom, you already talked somewhat about the B-21 and AWACS, but before we go to the rest of our audience for Q&A, could you reiterate a bit on the size of the B-21 force? I know, just to reiterate, the size you see right now, or the potential for an increased number of B-21s, and then right behind that, as you know already, tough call to cut our AWACS fleet. Now that as you look at filling the gaps for AWACS, I can't imagine a scenario, large forces package, that wouldn't require AWACS somewhere, the command and control capabilities of AWACS-like capability in an old plan. So could you talk about, first of all, B-21s, and then shift to how you're looking at AWACS capabilities, sustaining AWACS capabilities?
Yeah, the B-21, I know we've talked about a program of 100. Our leadership is is on record saying 145. Right now, though, what I'll say, and those are good numbers to keep in mind. What the ultimate fleet size ends up, maybe larger. I think we have to continue to analyze that. The most important thing right now is getting this platform fielded. The program is doing very well. I think you've heard the Secretary say several of the airplanes are formed up down at the factory. The first flight is not too far away. We're real excited about the capability of the platform moving forward. Getting ourselves to that 2-bomber fleet, getting the B-52 modernization, the new motors, and the radar modernization of B-52, and then when we get those capabilities, working our B-1 and B-2 out of service, so we get into a 2-bomber fleet, so we can have that long-range strike, as well as the nuclear capability that's so important for our nation. Much more to follow on that, but right now, my priority is making sure we have the resources applied so we can keep the B-21 development moving along. It's moving along well. We want to keep it in that direction. On the AWACS, I'll tell you, if you look at the condition of the fleet, it's a 707 with some really old motors. It's been challenged on the airframe. It's been challenged on the systems. Um, you know, we do need to recapitalize that fleet and go to something modern. You know, what I'm asked all the time, what was at the E7, hit the wedge tail. Certainly that platform's out there. Many of our close allies fly it. The Australians for probably most prominently, and now the Royal Air Force, the Brits are buying it too. So it's a hot line. So obviously we're looking at it. But before we can commit to what a E3 replacement would be, our acquisition professionals are doing due diligence with industry to make sure we know everything that's out there before we make a decision. But I will say that decision and that way forward is going to come pretty quickly. The idea of bringing the AWACS down some tails this year was all about paying for the replacement, and the idea is to invest in the replacement as quickly as industry can help us along, because we know we got to get to this replacement capability. We also know as you recapitalize any fleet, there's always a bit of risk as you recapitalize, because it's too resource intensive to have complete overlapping coverage or capability. You'll keep all the AWACS to the last minute when you have the entire replacement capability ready. Those resources just don't exist in our Air Force. So we've got to make sure that we do this transition smartly. We know there's going to be some risk involved in the transition, and we have to make sure that we work very closely with our joint partners and frankly some of our allies too, so we could all together manage that risk while the Air Force remissions into an alternate platform.
Great. Well, once again, you make you very both of you articulate and compelling in managing budget available with risk. So we've got about 10 minutes or so here to shift to the audience before we wrap up, about 10 minutes prior to the hour. So I'll start with Abraham Mashi. Abraham, if you could come up, voice, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Rachel Cohen. I think she's out there, please.
Thanks so much, Orville, and good to see you again, General Nahom and Liquori. Great opportunity to chat with you. I was wondering if you both can address this question. Huge research and development in both budgets this time around, but there's a real need to rebuild actual capability. What do you say to those who argue you should be spending more on real capability now and less on notional future concepts that may never deliver what the SECAF calls meaningful military capability?
Spaceport.
Well, that was for you both. That was for you both.
That's a tough question, but I could go. Let's start.
You gentlemen.
I think the trick with this in the budget world is to find the right balance, right? And I will speak for our domain. Things are evolving quickly in our domain, as they have for a little while, and so if all we focus on is the here and now, we will never evolve to where we need to be and where we see the adversary evolving. And so having that research and development is critical to setting the groundwork. All of our good capabilities that are on orbit today started out with R&D at some point. But the trick is that we've got to balance that, right? And so what things can we do now versus which things do we need to put some down payments on to be able to move where we're going? If all we did was continue to field the systems that we have, we would lack resiliency. The reason that we're working so hard on this on our side is that the capabilities that we have on orbit today were put on orbit with space as a benign domain. And so that meant from a budget perspective, we tried to use every last dollar to maximize data going down to the ground. Well, the reality of China as our pacing challenge and Russia certainly as another acute problem to deal with, and the capabilities that they are pursuing in our domain to counter us means that we've got to be able to evolve to more resilient architectures and be able to protect the things that we have out there today. And so that's a little bit of the balancing act that we have to do in this budget, and the reason that we went about it the way we did.
Yeah, I'll give the one word answer up front: balance. I tell you, it's a really good question. But we have to balance the near-term capability, and I think you're seeing us do that as an Air Force. Look at how we as an Air Force have responded to the crisis in Europe right now, and the amount of Air Force that's over there right now, ensuring our allies, our NATO allies, are protected should that crisis expand into NATO countries. the Air Force is there, not to mention Middle East, the Pacific Rim, and all around the world. We have to make sure that our airmen have the current day capacity they need to meet the combatant commander's need. That said, the RDT&E is so critical that we look to the future and we look for, what is out there in technology that can meet emerging threats. The RDT&E is not the hard part. I think the harder part is when we get the RDT&E and we find a technology, a capability that we need, is getting that to production and getting that through, many call it that valley of death, and how we bring a meaningful warfighting capability into production so we can get it at scale that's needed. And I'll tell you that, we are well served by our secretary right now, who understands that dynamic probably better than anybody, certainly in government right now. So we really look forward to his leadership over the next couple of years as we look at some of these RDT&E projects and some of the emerging capabilities, technologies, and working with our industry partners to bring these to field.
Yeah, and I think I would just add, I think that's really one of the main thrusts of these operational imperatives that he brought to the Department of the Air Force, and that is that he knows that the analysis that comes out of those is going to suggest, hey, we've got to get after some near-term things, and so here's what we need to do there. But we also need to start putting some down payments in place on the research and development side to inform the future.
Great. Looks like Rachel's not up with us today. How about Frank Wolf and then Brian Everstein?
Yeah, hi, it's Frank Wolf at Defense Daily. I just wanted to ask about GMTI. There's obviously something I might be missing here, but with the retirement of Joint Stars in 2024, there could be, it seems to me, there might be some gap here. You've got U2 with ASAR's radar, and you've got Block 40 Global Hawks, and then you have the Sentinel that can do the GMTI. But it doesn't look to me as if space-based radar is going to be ready in time. So in terms of alleviating any gaps in GMTI, the Army has its own efforts underway. I guess they have this supposed Bombardier 650 aircraft that I think Leidos has been providing for some testing. But again, that might violate that Key West agreement back in 1948 in terms of what the Army can actually have. So I'm just wondering, what are your views on what are the views in terms of the gap here? Is there a gap in coverage? Is there going to be? And what it seems to me the GMTI is a fairly important mission area going forward. And what are you doing in terms of? I know there was some talk with the NRO about the right mix of ground and air and space assets. Is that mix still being worked out? Just wanted to get any updates you can provide here.
I'll start out, Frank, and then I'm going to turn it over to Bill, because this is where the Air Force and the Space Force work very closely together. Having been a user of GMTI in my previous job over in the AOR, it is a critical capability. But you can't just look at. A lot of people look at the J-Stars and that being a problem going into the next few cycles as we look to retire that fleet. It is old. It's another 707 platform with old motors and significant reliability issues just because of the age of the platform. Our airmen that work on that platform do amazing work keeping that old platform flying and getting some relevancy to that mission. But we've got to get them better. Now you're right. We have some things we can mitigate the risk with in terms of the air piece. There's obviously some platforms we won't discuss here, but some of the ones you brought up, certainly the U2 one, we still have it, the Global Hawk Block 40, and some other platforms that some of our joint services operate to. And we have to work very closely with our joint partners in the combatant commands to make sure we can offer up air domain GMTI solutions, so they have the ability to see things moving on the ground. But there is a big space aspect of this, and it's a mission that we are certainly looking to our Space Force friends to help us out with that. And I'll turn over to Bill.
Sure, thanks. A great question. So there is a very specific reason that GMTI was kind of the second force design out of the chute, if you will. To your point, Frank, and that we are working real hard as two services, at least as well as others that may be able to deliver capability, to make sure that there is not a gap. That force design will report out later this year and will inform our 24 budget going forward. Again, there's also there's no surprise as to why moving target indicator is one of the Secretary's operational imperatives. All of these things come together for the exact reason that you're highlighting and the needs that General Nahom just mentioned. And so our goal in doing this force design is to be able to inform the 24 POM and beyond, so that we don't have the gap that you've talked about.
Please, Brian.
Yes, thank you so much for doing this. I have a couple of quick questions for General Nahom on some programs. Can you expand a little bit on the plan to cut back on the Jolly Green 2 buy? And what does that mean for the rest of the Pave Hawk fleet? What is the thinking behind there? And you had briefly touched on the special operations budget. There's a line for 9 armed Overwatch in the procurement book. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. First of all, on the let me take the armed Overwatch. That'll be quick. So, a couple cycles ago, we had there was a huge conversation about the Air Force's light attack program and special ops looking to that light attack program to fill a need for an armed Overwatch platform. We made a decision several cycles ago, working very closely with our special ops partners to separate those out. What we were doing with light attack was different than what they needed for an armed Overwatch platform. We actually moved some Air Force money into special ops to help them go after this platform. They intend to have a platform where to operate in places where, frankly, the U.S. Air Force is not. You think some areas where we just maybe Central Africa, other places around the world where the Air Force is not currently operating, and they're pursuing that armed Overwatch platform. Now, we are not, as an Air Force, are not working that program. That's certainly being worked through special ops, although we're watching it very closely because, as you imagine, our Air Force Special Ops AFSOC will be operating the platform and very likely from Air Force bases. So we're watching it closely and assisting as we go forward. And we're excited for our special ops friends to get the capability that we know they need for their mission set. On the Jolly Green, this is one of those tough calls as we go forward. First of all, on the existing Pave Hawk, the HH-60G that we have flying, as well as the OLR, the Operational Life Replacement helicopters, which are just a slightly newer HH-60G. We will phase those out over the next few years. There's no intention to keep those in service. There are some diminishing manufacturer supply issues with those helicopters, things we did not invest in, knowing that we were replacing those with the HH-60 Whiskey and the Jolly Green 2. When we went into this program many years ago, certainly it was before 2018 and the NDS that really changed our thinking here in the Pentagon and looking towards a pure fight. The HH-60, as you look at rescue, we're certainly having a very close look at what rescue looks like in a high-end fight. We know we have mission for the HH-60, and we are going to continue to buy it throughout this next budget, through this next year, through the budget year of FY23. But there is a decision about how what is the size of that fleet. Do we need to get to the original 113 helicopters, or is that resource better spent on other capabilities to make sure we have the rescue capability and capacity for a pure fight? And that's a conversation ongoing right now. What you see in the budget is you got the aircraft that have already been bought or contracted, and then and as well as another round of helicopters in FY23. And then this will be the conversation we have going into the 24th cycle about, is that going to be the end of that buy, or what should that fleet look like to make sure we have the rescue capacity going forward. It's a very robust conversation happening right now, and we'll get back to you when we have more information for our studies.
Well, thanks. We're going to start to wrap up here. We could not be better led as an Air Force, certainly as a nation, than to have the combined joint warfighting experience that both of you bring to the fight, and certainly now programming and the budgeting experience for you and your teams. Again, from all of us at the Air Force Association, and I think for really your entire nation, thank you. let me wrap up here a bit. You know, the 2023 requested defense budget reflects a continued decline to just over today about 3% of the federal budget. And that's the lowest in about a decade. So from your Air Force Association, for sure, as we agree with you and recognize that Russia, now labeled as an acute threat, and China remaining as a pacing threat, and giving everything that's happening in the world, and what we see, and we've reiterated as a nonstop demand for more of what airmen and guardians really you all bring to the fight. You think you're sized? Our Air Force, our Department of the Air Force is sized in both personnel and force structure to meet the real threats that you face every day?
Sorry, go ahead.
So I think you could put any service programmer up here and say, and we'd all be in the same spot, right? We owe it to our leadership, we owe it to Congress to articulate the threats that we see and the missions that we need to accomplish and what resources we need to do that. We're incredibly appreciative of what it is that we do get. Obviously, this budget was a large increase, and so that is a good thing. We'd probably be fired as programmers if we said we were completely satisfied every time, right? But that means it's on us and our teams to go back, do the analysis, bring additional data forward as markups and conferences go on, as well as we build the 24 budget.
Yeah, I would say it's as a programmer, it's always easy to say you need more because if you have more resources, the decisions get easier. But as Bill said, our nation gave our Air Force and Space Force a lot of money this year. And it's our job to make sure we apply those resources in the right place. And with that, you can't have everything. You can never have everything. You've got to make some tough choices. We clearly got we get very clear guidance, not just from our secretary, with Secretary Kendall, the operational imperatives and where he's trying to take our Air Force, certainly with the National Defense Strategy and in our look to peer fight. There are some trade-offs that have to be made because you just don't have enough resources for everything. But that said, our nation gives our Air Force a lot of money, and our job is to make sure we apply those resources in the manner that is consistent with what they expect out of their Air Force
And Space Force.
Thanks again. Y'all are just terrific. We can't thank you enough. Obviously, we're biased, but we love our airmen and guardians. And as we shift to a small group here, please know Abu, General Nahom, and Bill, General Liquori, for you and your teams, and for every airman and guardian and their family members. We're on your wing and we're on your delta, and doing everything we can to be articulate and credible in our voice, to advocate, to educate the public and advocate for dominant air and space forces. So thanks again, guys. And we'll shift to a smaller audience. And thanks again to our audience today, some almost 300 plus of you up on the net. And I know this has been valuable as we could make it more productive for this group as we go through a series of Air and Space Warfighters in Actions episodes in the coming months. Let us know what we can do to serve you and really to make this meaningful for our audience. So thanks very much. We'll take a short break and come back up with small group.